That's why I'm like almost more concerned with learning how to use the tools that I already have. And like, I've been like having this like come to Jesus moment of like going back to the basics on things. Like, all right, what's my left to right speaker alignment? Maybe that's actually causing more issues than the fact that I'm using these speakers.
You're listening to the GWNL-Podcast. Guys with no lives talking about audio.
Hello and welcome to episode 8 with GWNL-Podcast. I am Joe. We have Ben and Bryant once again. Still can't get them fired off of this crew, guys. I keep trying every week. And this week, in episode 8, we have one of the most dreaded deadly sins of audio engineering. The third deadly sin, gear lust.
Dun, dun,
So,
dun.
Who wants to take the first stab at gear lust? Your thoughts? We'll do a quick takes section because this isn't like educational, but quick takes,
Yeah.
and then we'll go into some talking points that we've written out. Anybody? Bueller, Brian, Ben. It's Ben. You're going to be the first target for the day.
I'm the first target.
All right. What are your quick takes on gear lust? Good,
quick
bad,
take.
ugly.
Good, bad, ugly. Okay, so it is definitely a good and bad thing. This gear lust can consume a lot of engineers, a lot of people getting excited about getting new equipment, and then also thinking that new equipment is going to be the key to producing good music. It's not always about the equipment. It's about...
You mean I don't need a U87 and an Avalon VT737 to sound amazing?
That's the only
What?
signal path that sounds good, right?
That's the
Everything
only
else.
right signal path. Everything else is trash.
The
Need
$6,000 signal path, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Actually,
Not
it's more
modded.
It's closer to 7, but
Yeah.
no, it's like 6 because it's like 2,500 and 3,500. But yeah, so yeah, that's a lot of money. And it's true. There's a lot of people that, and it's both. There's a lot of people that promote that idea that these are the things that are needed to be good or sound good, and a lot of people buy into that. And it's just simply not true. There's some aspects of it that are correct in the sense that it does. The better your equipment is, the better your product can sound. But that's not the only way to achieve good sounding results, is to have amazing gear. So,
Okay.
Yep.
All right, Bryant, quick take. Give me a quick take. Whoopsh.
In my opinion, gear affects the sound the least. The biggest thing is like the player or like your source material, whatever you're working with. Next comes the room that you're recording in, and then next, I would say, you know, how the gear is used that you have. You know, a good engineer is going to be a good engineer no matter what gear they're using. If they know how to use what they have, they can use that to their advantage and make great sounding music or great sounding audio. But like a novice or beginner with, you know, high end gear, I mean, it'll be high quality, but if they don't know how to use it, then it's not going to be.
it might not even be high quality. Yeah. If they don't know how to use it.
Yeah.
I'll be 100% honest with you. Like, one of the biggest impenetrable things in audio is like the vast ocean of options that you have. And a lot of times, starting with simpler gear, like analog, simpler gear, is a really great way of starting especially in audio in some regards, because you don't have to worry about if I got a digital mixer and I was just brand new to mixing, you have like routing, which is complicated. You have like a bajillion other things that are like very complicated and confusing, like many EQs, and you don't even really know what you should use those EQs for. And a lot of people with that many options will start to make poor decisions, not knowing that they're making poor decisions, not knowing that there's a simpler way of doing things because they've always just had so many options. Like, oh, well, Pro Tools can handle 128 tracks, so I might as well just double this, and I'm going to have like chorus 1 track, and I'm going to put chorus 2 vocal background track number 47, and now I'm going to create 72 other... I'm blowing this out of proportion, but it's that same idea of they can do whatever they want because we have so much power.
I think that goes with the concept of more isn't always better. Sometimes more is just more. And that goes with track count, as well as gear. So less is more. And a lot of times that applies to like everything. But that's one of the things where, like, as I'm teaching with my students, like I always just get usually like the stock channel strip kind of plugin or basic EQ or basic compressor that is being used in the program. And that's what I'm like, you can only use this EQ, even though there might be other EQs and compressors in the software that's available to them. I'm like, for right now, I want you to just use this EQ so you can understand what's happening. And it's definitely not a modeled EQ. It's some kind of, they have a little graphic display so they can see it.
Something that I do think is important to bring up is kind of like the fine wine principle, where, with gear, there is a certain point where, gear can limit you, and that's when you should upgrade, but you need to, work with what you have. And, I guess the point is, create with what you have. Don't let your gear limit you based on creating. Don't be like, oh, I can't create because I don't have X compressor or I don't have X mic. If you have a mic, you can still record, but there comes a point where what you're using is kind of limiting for what you're wanting in your tone, and then that's usually when you get into the gear lust, is when you're starting to tone chase. And guitarists are super notorious for that, just because they want to find the golden tone. They want their signature sound. And as audio engineers, I do know that, even some mix engineers can get caught up in that.
It's true. I mean, I used to work at a store selling equipment years ago, and my boss had this philosophy that your gear should inspire you. And it was like, to him, if your gear doesn't inspire you, then that's when you should, look at getting something different. So maybe you have this microphone that you love and works great, but you notice that every time you use it, you don't feel as inspired as you do with other things. And so maybe that's the time to consider, getting rid of that microphone or shelving that microphone and getting something else. Because I think everybody that has suffered from gear lust realizes that you get this new piece of gear and all of a sudden you feel inspired to create and to do stuff with it. And I've looked at myself in those circumstances. I mean, I have some series of microphones, some of the first microphones I had, which were like not that, kind of inexpensive microphones. And they have a distinct sound to them that I didn't notice until I'd used them for years. And then I got to the point where I was using other microphones, and I would use those old microphones again. And I was like, hey, there's that sound that I'm always trying to EQ out. And I started to recognize what I disliked about those microphones. And I was like, okay, these are not inspiring me, because obviously I'm trying to like overcome what they're doing to my sound. And I realized, and I shelved them right then. And I use them as, that's like, those are the mics you throw on hi-hat and stuff like that, when you're out of mics.
Yeah.
You don't care if it gets hit by a stick.
It's not important.
But like, it's interesting. That was when it really hit me, because I was like, oh, I can hear the sound of this microphone and it drives me crazy. I even had a guitar that's an amazing guitar that I sold because it did the same thing. There was a distinct sound to it, and that sound started to grate on me. And it was like I was always trying to EQ that sound out. And I had to sell the guitar because I'm like, I can't record with it anymore, because every time I record, I feel like I'm trying to EQ out the sound of that guitar, which is driving me crazy. Right. So it should inspire you.
I mean, can I just say one thing about this?
Just one thing, Joe. Just one.
I'll say as many dang things as I want. Thank you. No, so here's the thing. I don't think buying new stuff or getting new stuff is bad. But I think a lot of the times what we find ourselves doing is getting into these kind of rat race mentalities. I use the term rat race. It's just whatever. Because like that's the fundamental flaw. Like, I have a friend, he's a great guy, works as a live sound engineer, and it's his side job. He's like a radio guy, and then he's a radio host, and then he just purchases audio equipment on the side. I don't think it's bad that he basically says, yeah, this is my side gig, this live sound thing I do, so I can just buy new gear and buy new, like that's how he satisfies his gear lust. Is his side job is doing live sound, and that's how he affords to buy new gear. And he's like, I don't like these microphones anymore. I want to buy new ones. Why? I don't like them. And I make enough money on the side that I can just make the business pay for its own gear. That's not a bad thing. And I don't think anyone should look down on somebody for that.
Yeah. I think it's totally fine to, do something like that. But I think that the whole idea behind gear lust, in my opinion, is that it's prohibiting you from doing what you want to do because you're so obsessed with, I can't do X because I don't have Y. When it's like, no, with what you have, you are able to still, write music, or you're still able to record or whatever you're doing. But it just may be limiting in a certain way to where, you may not want to. When you're getting into like making YouTube videos and stuff, you can kind of get into that same thing where it's like, I don't have a professional camera, so I can't record videos. I have to wait till I get this video to start. And then when you do finally get that camera, are you actually going to like sit down and record those videos, or are you just going to let that camera collect dust?
Now, I want to just say one other thing to kind of separate, to make a little bit of a separation here. I think that's okay for people who are beginners and who are starting out. Now, if you're a professional and you're working and like there are deadlines, and like I understand this a little bit because of some of the pressures of my job. I have to create results. I can't be tinkering around, which means, I have to purchase things that get me those results. I'm in this position where, if my pre's aren't good on my live board, that affects the end result. If I don't have good monitor wedges, that causes feedback. Like, there are, like, don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating that you go out and spend, like $100,000 on just monitor wedges right now. That's not what I'm saying. But as a professional, you also have to realize that lower quality products also can hamper your efforts as a producer or as a live sound engineer in those ways. And you have to it's a game of benefits and drawbacks when it comes to purchasing equipment and what is going to be the best versus not good. Because we all know that like the general consensus with lower quality or lower priced gear is that it comes with more features. They're more feature rich.
Yeah.
While not necessarily having the same level of quality as higher tier gear. Like, there are some like audio interfaces that are just ADDA conversion, analog to digital, digital to analog conversion, and that's all they do. There's no gain. There's nothing else, but they are the cleanest like ADDA converters that you'll ever find. And then you pair that with like an amazing preamp section for your 8 channels or 16 or 32, whatever you're running, and that delivers the product that you need. And then also match that, and I'm going to say this: set your expectations for your audience, because sometimes nobody in that audience is going to care. Like, nobody who's listening to that, they're not going to know that you spent like $50,000 on your signal chain for like one lead vocalist. They're not going to hear that, and there's not going to be any appreciable difference. So when you're purchasing equipment, manage your expectations. Kind of, you're playing this dance of this devil's advocate of, do I need this? Does it really effectively accomplish that? I don't know.
That brings up another aspect of this too, which is we're always like referring to just like sound quality, but there's also efficiency, which is what you kind of alluded to there. That's part of what you're paying for with gear. And I was just thinking the same thing with like in my studio here, where people are coming in to record and they're paying an hourly rate to record. What you're looking at in your setup and equipment is different than when you're just recording for yourself. Because I spent all kinds of money doing this patch bay and wiring that up so that people can come in and I can just quickly, without ever having to go behind the equipment, patch things in. Whereas before, when I've been doing stuff myself, it's like, I'll crawl behind the stuff and disconnect things and plug them in and plug something in different. And if it took me 20 minutes to repatch, plug something in differently, that's fine, because nobody had to pay for those 20 minutes except for me, Right. But if somebody's coming in here and paying for time and they see that I can do stuff really quickly, then that's impressive to them, and they don't feel like they're wasting their money. So that's something too. It's not just sound quality, but it's efficiency that's part of what you're paying for with gear and such.
I know that's why I'm looking at a bunch of like software. Okay, so that's one of the things. I'm looking at software and equipment for like a system tuning rig, so that I can better create a cleaner canvas, so that I can mitigate problems with equalization in varied venues, because I'm always going to different venues and I can't guarantee that space's acoustics are going to be beneficial for me to mix on. And so I'm trying to kind of level that playing field by building myself a better analysis rig that I can incorporate into my live sound rig design. Things like phasing, sub alignment, as well as like power alleys and all that stuff. And so those are like, as a live sound engineer, those are things that can help you to give a more consistent, better product. And I'll even give you a cheaper counterpoint to that. When you go to that venue, you mark the way you EQ your mains. You take notes, you take a screenshot, and then you compare it to the next time you go there. If you listen to the same reference tracks while mixing, and you compare how you EQ it each time. I was watching a video of some guy who's doing that, and he says a good engineer is a consistent engineer, and their ability to reproduce those results over and over again. And I really vibe with that, because you should know what you're doing consistently and across different spaces and places and whatnot. Anyways.
Yeah.
Mix good.
But that's a good point too, with Joe, like, you know, looking to purchase the system to analyze
analysis
the room.
rig.
Yeah, the analysis rig. Whereas the more sexy alternative would be like, ooh, I should get a bigger, fancier console, you know. And but it's like,
you think a console's gonna make that space sound better?
Exactly. No, that's the point. And I think that's one of the fallacies of gear lust is like, there's the sexy items, like in studio it's microphones.
Yeah.
And, and in live sound
Nerds.
it's probably like speakers or consoles, you know.
Oh, it's definitely systems like line arrays. It's like, oh yeah, I want to get this acoustics
line
of
array
this
is gonna make
D&B audio.
it sounds so
like
good.
whatever.
But guess what? Your system analysis, your room analysis software and system is gonna do more than really good speakers or really good console.
And honestly, sometimes line array aren't always the correct choice for a venue, especially when you're considering doing like installs and stuff. You know, depending on the venue, you know, there's lots of churches that will want different types of PAs. And if you look at more of the contemporary evangelical churches, you know, those are pretty big churches for the most part, and those are like rock shows, so they do have line array, and that's perfect for that situation. But if like a more traditional church wants to get a PA installed in their church, then they're not going to go for a line array because they don't need that much power. It's a smaller church, and then also it distracts from usually from the architecture of that building. Usually they'll want something that can be hidden. Right. And like even at my work in the like theater, they used to have line arrays there, but before I was hired on, a few years before I was hired on, they actually changed out the sound system and got more. They moved away from line array and went to like more like a directional point array type thing.
Yeah, point source arrays and whatever.
Point source.
Yeah,
they didn't even need
delay
delays
towers and point source. Yeah. Oh no, delays. Okay.
They didn't even need delays for that particular hall, and everybody has been like, yeah, this sounds way better than it used to sound. And you know, we thought that we needed a line array originally, but we didn't.
Yeah.
And so,
you know, and I want to say something too. Like, Ben, you had made a comment earlier about how you had a friend who had told you that getting new equipment is often inspiring. I'll tell you that as cool and as fun as getting new equipment is, what really inspires me as an engineer is being more efficient and economical with the things that I have. Like, again, that's why I'm like almost more concerned with learning how to use the tools that I already have. And like, I've been like having this like come to Jesus moment of like going back to the basics on things. Like, all right, what's my left to right speaker alignment? Maybe that's actually causing more issues than the fact that I'm using these speakers. Like, what about my sub? How about my cardioid array? I'm lucky enough that I get to run a cardioid array, but I'm also running into other issues, and I've actually been researching more on proper like cardioid sub arrays, and I'm learning things that I didn't know about before. like mitigating problems and like, oh, how should you do that? And well, here's more problems if you do it this way, and a bunch of things like that. And I think learning techniques with the tools that you have is almost more inspiring for me to kind of disagree with your buddy.
No, but yeah, I mean, I think you need to. You didn't understand what I said, Joe. What he said, which doesn't necessarily, like, it agrees and disagrees with you at the same time, is that it's not that you need to get new equipment to inspire you. You need to have equipment that inspires you, and that's kind of what you're saying. And so, if you have something that doesn't inspire you, you should consider getting something new that will. But it's true. The other thing, and I wanted to say this before, is that I've had to do this multiple times where I've had to tell myself, you need to just like use the stuff you have and just like work with it for a while.
It's the hardest thing
before buying something new. I think we all go through that where we're just like, it's always like, oh, I need to buy this and I need to buy that. And this is awesome. And you're inspired by this new thing. But then you're like, okay, I've got a lot of cool things. Now I just need to work with it for a while and use what I have and enjoy it and utilize it. And then maybe later on, I'll consider getting something new, but I've got to stop for a while because I've got to make some money before I can spend some more money.
Yeah. I not to like cut off because I feel like Brian hasn't talked much on this, and I want to hear more of his opinions.
Let him talk at all. And
which is like, Brian, you don't get to say anything.
Gearlust is a big thing for you, Bryant, right?
I'm a pretty big. I like to dream. I don't always buy, but I like to dream. And
dreaming is always acceptable.
There's a lot of things that I eventually would like to get, but don't have the money for. But I try not to let that prohibit me from creating. I still, I'm still trying to, mix remotely for clients, and I'm still trying to do my own stuff. And
I'm like trying to minimize how much work I do. I want more work. I'm like, get away. Anyways, keep going, Brian. Sorry.
Yeah. Anyway, let's move on to like our last point that we had. We're like, as far as digital audio workstations go, oftentimes in the studio, especially people that are starting out, they're like, oh, which DAW is the best? Which one is for me? And like, that's an okay thing to do, but I kind of like, I'm under the opinion that you should just pick a DAW and learn it. It doesn't matter which one, but pick it. And if it's not Pro Tools, you're wrong. I'm just kidding.
So, okay, I'm about to do something, and I'm about to, something. All right. So, first off.
Here it comes.
I use Pro Tools. There's the first sin that I'm going to give you. The second sin, I use Pro Tools on Windows because screw Apple. I hope we never get an Apple. I hope they never put money into us. I'm sorry. I hope if I can do any one thing to benefit this podcast, it's never to have them put money. Anyway, so, okay, moving on.
And I will say that I turned Joe to the dark side of Pro Tools from Ableton.
Okay. First and foremost, I still use Ableton. I still use Pro Tools, and I still use what's the other one that I use? I'm trying to remember. I use it as like a.
You love it so much that you can't.
I still use Ableton. It doesn't matter that much. Anyways, no. Honestly, here's the thing: as a Pro Tools user, you don't need Pro Tools. Now, there are some jobs where they're gonna expect you to know Pro Tools. And that's a part of the job thing. I'm sorry. That's what some people do. Whether it is or good or not, I don't think it should matter personally. And I think like we've created this culture that surrounds Pro Tools. Like it's the industry standard. Oh, I'm going to be honest. You can make good mixes on any DAW if you're competent, minus maybe some of the cheap ones. I think Reaper is a great DAW. I think Logic is a great DAW. I learned on Logic first and foremost, and then I went to Ableton and then to Pro Tools. As I learned, and I'll be honest, the reason why I use Pro Tools isn't because I can't use another DAW. It's because Ben forced me to learn all the freaking hotkeys. No, he forced me to learn all this stuff.
Right, when you know all the key commands, right?
But that's the way it is in Ableton or in Logic. Or in any other DAW, and the more time you invest, the better you'll be.
Yeah,
like I started off using using Acoustica Mixcraft 5. They're on.
The heck is that?
They're on version 9 now, and they finally have some more like professional features included. But that's what I started on. Then when I went to school, I switched over to Logic, and then did get into Pro Tools and. I stick with Pro Tools mainly because I have a great workflow in Pro Tools, and it's really conducive to the way that I work. But I have friends that, for them, Pro Tools is not inspiring at all, and they would rather do everything in Logic.
Yeah, there you go. See, inspiring. No, it's true, and I think the main point that we're trying to make, and our talking point was that all of the big DAWs can produce professional content. So all the big DAWs out there, there's songs you've heard on the radio that have been
Cubase,
at least,
Logic,
produced on there or produced and mixed. There is some
FL Studio, sadly.
Yeah, FL Studio. There's definitely songs. I can tell you some songs that are definitely FL Studio that are stock sounds on FL Studio.
Man.
And I know there's a lot of people, anybody who uses FL Studio will be like, hey, this sounds just like such and such song. Oh, yeah, it's because it was done on FL Studio. But there's plenty of DAWs out there, and you can produce professional content with it. There's a reason why Pro Tools is industry standard in a certain level. Like when you get a big studio and you got lots of inputs and outputs, it is a really stable system, and that's part of the reason why
as it crashes on us. Like, I'm sorry. Like, people talk about stability in Pro Tools, and I'll be honest, it can be stable,
especially the HDX system that we're comparing.
The problem is that we're comparing Pro Tools native versus an HD system, and the HDX system. Pro Tools was never, or it wasn't originally intended to be.
Yeah, it was secondarily native. Yeah, so I mean, and that's the reason why, and the benefit of like what they've promoted, like, oh, you should use Pro Tools at home with the native version so that you can take your project and come into a studio and then just pick up right where you left off. But that can be done with other systems too. And there's lots of big studios that have a Pro Tools HDX system, and then they have other DAWs there too. But there's a reason why it's standard in those big studios, but it doesn't negate anything else, and it doesn't mean like everything else doesn't work well. And like especially in like composition for film and television, most of those composers use different programs to produce and compose the music,
like DaVinci Resolve or like Avid Composer. Like there's a bunch of other things.
Video. But but
they have a lot of great. I've used it for audio too. They have a lot of great tools. It's not that bad.
But to produce the music, they'll use Digital Performer and Logic and Cubase and FL Studio, but then they have to actually send it over to stems in Pro Tools for it to be mixed a lot of times. And so it's, I guess, getting back to the original point, is all we're trying to say is that
Pro Tools is the best. Don't buy anything else. You
should be inspired by your DAW. And any of these DAWs can be inspiring and produce professional content.
Yeah, you should be inspired by the gear you use as well, the software you use. It's not just limited to gear and.
You should only be inspired by Pro Tools and have an S6Ls, S3s, and nothing else. And you should only.
Are you having fun, Joe?
I just I just say that because that's what people say. Okay, it's not true. I'm sorry. I'm making jokes. I shouldn't laugh. It's just funny to me because that's what's parroted all the time. They're like, oh, you need an L acoustics rig, or oh, you need this, and or like a VT737 with a U87 or a U67. You have to buy vintage gear. You can't use any modern gear because it's too clean. Oh, we have to go back to metal oxide tape. Oh, sorry. I just. Dude, I'm sorry. It's just one
dancing.
It's just one of these things, man. Like it's like inane. Like audio engineers are like, oh, we need this, and you don't. That's why I'm saying that. That's why I'm making light of these things.
I will say though that the worst recording session that I ever saw was done with a musician that had to have a tube microphone. Couldn't give you a reason why he had to have a tube mic, but he had to have it. Because he read on the internet that he has to record through a tube mic, and it ended up being one of the worst recording sessions that I sat through, and it was really bad. And he would have sounded the same through that tube mic as he would have through a like $3 mic.
Yo, and I want to give you a set of ratios that'll kind of tell you the outcome of your sound, right? 50% of your sound is determined by the actual source, the quality of that source. If they're not a good musician, as much as people like to think that auto-tune can fix everything, the real answer is no, it cannot. So 50% is the source, the quality of the musician and who you're putting through that, the vocalist, whatever. The other, like I'd say another 30% is the mic positioning and technique that you're using. Is like another 30%. So already we're at like 80% of the quality and response. Then you have 10% is the microphone, 10% I would even say like 5% is the preamp, and AD/DA conversion. It can affect it, but like again, it almost does like those 5% preamp, 5% AD/DA conversion, and finally that 10% is I don't know, the mic cable that you're using. I don't even think that counts. I don't even think that's like a 0.01%.
All of it counts. No, I would argue that the microphone, the quality of the microphone, the pre and the AD are equal.
I'd agree.
Like equal percentage, you know. So if you have 20% left, you've got to divide that by 3. And then the cables in there is part of it too, because you know it's going to be defined by the weakest link in your chain. But I think that one of the big mistakes that people make, like I said earlier, is whatever the sexy thing is. And it's usually the microphones. And the big aha moment that people have is realizing that your preamp makes just as big of a difference, if not a bigger difference, than the microphone that you're using.
Yes.
Because you can use a simple dynamic microphone through a really nice pre, and it can sound better than a decent condenser mic does through a really crappy pre, you know?
I'm also going to say one more thing. You don't need a large diaphragm condenser to record everything. Holy crap. That company is built on the foundation that you don't need a large diaphragm condenser. So when you hear people going on about that, tell them to go into a corner and cry alone about it.
DPA and Earthworks, you know, lots of Earthworks stuff for small diaphragm condensers, and they're incredible.
And those
stuff,
are great
mics.
mics.
You know, if you look at like Shure, SM57 is a staple, whether you're in a studio or live.
You know, that's the cool thing. We just experienced this the other day in one of my classes where we're going through microphone techniques the whole semester, and we're recording different things. And we just keep on, every time we do something, I'm like, yeah, this is the common microphone that you would use on piano or this or that, or bass guitar amp or something. And then it's like, and let's try a 57 on there. And it's like, we recorded violin the other day, and the 57 was awesome. It like sounded almost as good as the condenser mic, and it was like almost like it was a competition. Like it was close, and it was like, man, this 57 sounds like as good as the condenser in the same spot on the violin. And I was kind of shocked because I'd never actually tried a 57 on a violin in that same spot. And I was just like, whoa, this is awesome. And it's like you put it on a kick drum, it actually sounds decent on a kick drum. You put it on a bass guitar amp, it sounds decent on that. You've got other mics that work better for those things, but the 57 sounds really good on everything. And I know we're not supposed to endorse gear, but if I was on a desert island, I would take a 57 because I could hammer nails with it. You know,
that's what I was gonna say. I mean, they're not just good for hammering things into the decking, you know,
and use it to record everything on that desert island. Yeah,
yeah. It's like, oh yeah, I got this wonderful palm tree sound the other day with my Zoom recorder and my SM57.
And I don't know how I charged it, but the other thing to
Hamster
add to
power.
what Joe was saying about the source, a great example of that is drums. So like. You can have a decent drum kit, but if like it's not tuned well with like newer heads, then it sounds really bad. So, but if you tune it well, then it can sound, and then you play it well too.
And
like
you can all, like, don't get me wrong. I had this issue just like last week with my drummer. He's a good guy. I have nothing to say that's bad about him. And we were having some weird resonances. And so you know what I did? I didn't change the microphones. I just EQ'd it out. I was like, all right, I know it's roughly about like 220 hertz. All right, let's wonk. And I just got rid of it, and it sounded fine. And in context, in the whole mix, that snare sounded fine. It didn't sound boxy. It sounded fine. The tom sounded great, honestly. And it was just one of these things where, like, again, you don't always need $1 million to sound good.
Yeah.
Especially because how many other people know? How do they? I'm just going to ask you guys this question. How do you know if I'm recording with a VT737 and a U87? If you don't see the microphone or the pre.
We know. Especially from, the social media video of the person recording.
Oh, yeah, because you always have to post every in the studio video. Like,
Exactly.
yo, guys, in the studio making a hot new mix. This mix fire, dude. Sorry,
Cool.
I don't hate. Okay, I'm sorry. That was rude. Anyways, I'll stop.
Anyway, mix good.
Mix good.
Yeah, we should finish up.
Good luck, don't suck.
Any any final points or anything like that? I guess the one thing that we kind of alluded to but didn't really state clearly was the whole concept of a good engineer with lackluster equipment can create great results. A lackluster engineer with good equipment can produce lackluster results. So it really is about the skill. And that's what we've been saying with all this stuff. But that really kind of sums it up that you don't need good equipment. You need good skills.
You need good ears. And I'll give a quick story because we're almost out of time. But I was working a gig with this guy he was a saxophone player, great guy, good friend. I have nothing against him, and he was doing well. But he's not a mix engineer. And he had told me, because I literally had like this really small mixer with like a 3-band EQ, like a sweepable mid, like a low, like a low low cut, and then like a high. I can't remember what it was. Anyways, it's a 3-band with like a set low and high, and then like a middle that's a sweepable, which is very like low. And he's playing saxophone and walking around this wedding, and like walking around in front of my mains, and I had to EQ it pretty aggressively, but it was not horrible. It wasn't the worst sounding thing. And I mean, even the system was kind of like really not the best system, but I made it work. And he says, I mean, it didn't sound great. I'll be honest. It was functional, not aesthetic. And he said to me afterwards, he's like, man, I've never been able to walk around and play like that in front of an audience ever. Like I've never been able to do that like that. And you've made that work. And I mean, I think anyone in that audience would tell that's not the way a saxophone's supposed to sound, but it worked. And he was able, it made him happy as a client, and it made them, it achieved the desired result at the end of the day. And I will admit, I would never suggest you ever doing that if you had a chance to avoid doing a setup like that. But in live, you don't always have a chance because of planning and event planners. But your skills do matter. Planners. And like, you don't need crazy equipment to make that happen, like good, like honestly, like even decent or acceptable or passable is good.
Mm-hmm.
Mix good.
Don't suck.
Good. Yeah.
Don't suck. GWNL.
Good luck, don't suck.
Out.
All right, mix good. GWNL out.